Take it away.
Hey guys, so my name is Maina Wycliffe. I don't have that of a huge introduction to do about me. I don't know if anyone does, but I'm an engaged software engineer at Francis, and also I'm the author of All Things TypeScript. So today we are going to be covering a topic very close to my heart, which is standalone components. And we are going to be looking at where we are. For those of you who are unaware of, is that at the moment we are at version 14 of Angular, to be specific 14.20, with some patch numbers added behind that. And standalone components were introduced in version Angular in version 14, and we are looking forward to the release of version 15 in the coming weeks. I don't really think it's going to be more than a month, but I'm not really sure. So today is sort of like a look at the journey of where we are since the standalone components were introduced in developer preview. So they are still not in stable, so things might change here and there, but that's going to change with version 15. So at the moment, I think we are as stable as we can get, because in this talk we're going to be looking at where we are with these standalone components, and where we are heading with version 15, and probably have a little bit of a peek into the future, version 16 and beyond. So a little bit about me. So like I said, I'm a Google developer expert for Angular, software engineer functions. I also love TypeScript and love teaching it. So I have a newsletter, All Things TypeScript. If you want to learn TypeScript, please feel free to subscribe. Goes weekly, but have been taking a sort of like a break this month, but that's going to change starting from next month when I start setting out regular content, at least once a week, but I'm targeting for twice a week. So standalone components. I know most of you have heard about them. Others are wondering, well, what are standalone components? But a little bit of sort of like going back into the past. Angular did not have the ability to use direct components directly, at least not without the context of a module. So a module is sort of like a container that contained components, directive pipes, and all these things were sort of related and shipped together. By default, Angular shipped with a root component, root module, which is the app module, and everything else. Whenever you generated a new component, new pipe, a new directive, you had to declare it within that module, so that if you're going to use that module within your Angular application, that component within your Angular application elsewhere, you have to import the module and then use the component. So you have to import it into, declare it into a module, and then export it within the module so that it's accessible, so that its API is exposed to the outside world. The problem with this is that it adds a lot of boilerplate, because let's say you wanted to create a single component, and then you have to add a module which basically declares the component and then exports it. And this is sort of like a lot of work, especially when you're doing building a small application rather than enterprise application where Angular shines, where modules make sense. But for small application, maybe you're building a small application for work and things like that, then this is adding a lot of work to developers, because you have to have at least a module and a component in order for the application to, or for your application or Angular application to work. So there has been a lot of clamor over the last few months, actually not few months, few years, for Angular to simplify this. We started with the movement around scams, whereby each component will get its own module, so that it's a pattern whereby usability is a little bit easier. So there's also issues around whereby it does take away the flexibility. So with scams, you had one module per component instead of having one module, multiple components. And then it's easier to use it in multiple places without worrying about tree shaking, bundle sizes, and so on. So with Angular 14, this changed because they released the developer preview for standalone components. So when we talk about standalone components in Angular, there's something you have to keep in mind. We are not talking about just components. We are talking about directives and pipes as well, because all these have to be ahead to be declared within a module. But from Angular 14, if you wanted, you can now create a new standalone component, and either component metadata or pipe metadata or directive metadata, all you have to do is add the standalone flag, and this or the standalone, and set it to true, and this would tell tell Angular, or this tells Angular that don't expect this to be declared within a module and can be imported and exported just like a normal module would. So this is why a module components were introduced, so that you can have what is it called? So that you can have less boilerplate when you're dealing with components. And since then, that was around May, the end of May or beginning of June. We have taken a lot of journey whereby, because it's in developer preview, it allowed the Angular team to sort of like play with things, experiment with things, without worrying of or having to worry about following semantic versioning rules and things like that, where they will need to sort of like support the existing APIs for a while. So everyone who wanted to use standalone components had to know they were taking a risk, but it also allowed us to, as a community, to take advantage of that, use them, experiment with them, and then provide the team back to provide the Angular team with feedback, and then they improved on that. So that's the current state of standalone components. So like I said, we have when you talk about standalone components, we talk about components, pipes, and directives. And as you can see, they all in the component metadata, you can see there is a standalone flag that is set to true, or standalone property for all three. So the other key difference between a standalone component, a standalone application, and a standalone and an engine module application is how they are bootstrapped. With standalone components, we have bootstrapping application where we provide the root components, and then we can provide the providers. This is for dependency injection purpose. As you can see with this example, we are providing roots for our application. And then we are providing notes for application, and that's it. So this is completely different to how you bootstrap an ng module application. And by default, Angular does not generate a standalone component. Actually, there's no way to generate a standalone component unless you're using something custom like NX to do that. So that's not coming in Angular 15, unfortunately. But it's also, I also understand the team, because there are a lot of challenges around that, because it would break a lot of things, especially around the community, where things like schematics, whereby generators expect to find module, ng module, in order to configure the application correctly. So this is sort of going to be a sort of like a feedback between the community and the team as this is getting worked for. Maybe with Angular 16 or maybe 17, they will have something for us, but we have to wait for that. For the time being, all you have to do in order to convert an existing, once you generate a new Angular project with the ng module, the first thing you need to do is delete the route module, that is app.module.ts, and then come to main.ts and replace the whole code with what you're seeing on the screen. So the key parts being, the key differences being line 15 to 17, which is different. And then the providers, as you can see, we are not using, what is it called, router module to provide routes. We are using provider route. And these are sort of like the new APIs that are coming to, are coming for standalone components. Some of them, like provide router, are already available at Angular 14.2, but there are a few others which are coming to Angular 15. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to sort of like mark the ones that are like currently available and the ones that are coming in the future. So anything I'm going to say here is probably going to work or not work depending on which version of Angular you're using. So I'll probably say wait until 15, and then you're sure everything I'm going to cover here is going to be available in Angular globally. So something else I need to mention about standalone components is that, like I said, they were released in version 14 in developer preview. In version 15, they are stable. And what this means is that the Angular team guarantees at least 2 versions of deprecations, so that if they say they mark an API, a standalone API component from Angular 4.15 onwards is deprecated, you have 2 extra versions, that is 16, 17, for you to sort of like migrate to the new APIs they have introduced to replace the one they have deprecated. So that's something you have to keep in mind when you're talking about something coming out from developer preview, where it can break at any time to where they say now this API is stable. It doesn't mean it will change. It just means that Angular is going to the Angular team has you in mind when doing the migration. So we are looking at Angular 14.2 and 15, sort of like APIs, new APIs that we have and that are coming up. And so let's see what we get. So obviously the first one is router. So as you can see below, they have added the provide router, the provide router function, which works with standalone components. And the first argument it takes is going to be the routes, the same routes you provide with when you're using route module. So it's a routes array with array routes, and then it takes a number of features we are going to see next that you can use to configure your routes. If you looked at our example here on line 16, you can see we have with enabled blocking initial navigation, and that's a configuration of route. And something I want to say about standalone components, it's a pattern that you are going to notice over this talk is that we keep talking about we are talking about provide, which is for the purpose of dependency injection, and then for configurations, all our functions start with. So with enabled blocking, with and so on and so on. So this is how you use it. So you have provide router and then routes, and then you can provide other features. And these are the features that are available. So you can configure debug tracing, disable initial navigation, blocking initial navigation with in-memory scrolling, preloading, router config. I won't go into details of this configuration because this exists. These configurations already exist with the router module, which we have been using so far, or it's still going to be used because it's not going anywhere. So if you are interested in any of these, learning more about any of these features, the documentation are available on the Angular website or Angular doc site, and I'll link some links at the end of this talk where you can learn more about this. So you can this method accepts after you provide the initial routes. They don't have to be in any specific order. So the features you are going to play with or configure for the router, but you can provide as many as possible as you want. So and so on. So something else that's very common to, or one of the most common questions I get asked, or something a common pattern for us as developers to do is lazy loading. So you may want to lazy load something so that you can reduce the initial bundle size that's loaded on the website. And so with the standalone components, you obviously can't lazy load components. So the router property gets a load component, and then you can specify the component you want to load onto whenever a path is added. So it's just like a normal route with a path load component. You can have guards in there, you can have title resolvers, and so on, and then you can have load component. And in this case, it's instructing Angular, do not bundle this together with this route, but instead lazy load it and sort of like load it when it's requested from the server, instead of doing it on the initial bootstrapping of the application. This allows you to have like smaller chunks, which increases the performance of your application. So another interesting feature that's coming to Angular is ability to load what we call feature routes. So before we had like, so if you can see this, so if I can explain a little bit about how lazy loading used to do. With ng modules, you could have like a new module with a new router module or feature router module that had an array of routes in it. But as you can see, because we are talking about individual components, that's no longer possible when you're using standalone components. And you don't really want to be pushing people away to say, like, in this case, you have to use ng modules. No, you don't want to do that. So what we are trying to do, what this does, so what feature loops allow is that it allows you to sort of like create a set of routes. So it's an array of routes, then lazy load that. So using the same load children we used to use before with load modules. So you say load module, then import the array of routes, which as you can see in the first code snippet is an array of routes, which is called routes, and it's exported, and then we're importing that, and then sort of like resolving that so that this tells Angular lazy load this set of routes instead of like having to lazy load individual components into that. So allowing you to have a chunk which has a similarly related routes if you want to. So the other thing you need to, when you talk about components, so there's one advantage of using modules that always, that a lot of people have always been reluctant to jump into the, what is it called, the standalone component bandwagon. So that's providing dependencies. So when we have like this, which is, let me just go back. So we have the providers array on your bootstrapping application, and this provides DI for the route component and its children. So what happens if you want to provide routes for provide dependency injection for a route and its children? So with Angular, you have now a new providers array inside the route, a new property. And in here, you can provide dependencies or inject that, inject any dependencies you want for all the routes and for that specific route and the children of it, and they are going to get that dependency. So this is sort of like gives you the same flexibility as when you had ng modules, whereby you would create a feature module and then do the edge injection within that. So this providers array sort of like gives you the same flexibility as that. So the other thing, obviously, we usually use a lot is HTTP client. So basically, we use this to fetch fetch remote content that could be from servers or anywhere else. And before we had to import the HTTP client module inside the module, and now we have a provide HTTP client, which also takes a series of configurations or functions which can configure the client. And this can be provided, all these are for the dependency injection purpose. So like you can see, when I'm stopping an application, I can say provide client, and this will configure HTTP client for the route component and all its children. So the HTTP client has the following features. So you can provide the interceptors. You can you can all add those JSON per support legacy interceptors. I think this has to do with the HTTP interceptors that are legacy and all other settings. I won't go into detail for this because there's a clear documentation on the Angular docs. So please refer to that if you have any questions specifically in relationship to the features you can provide to the client. But just like the provide route one, this also takes a series of them, and so you can say provide HTTP client, and then so with the interceptors, then pass in your interceptor, and so on and so on and so on. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to. You can have, if you had multiple HTTP interceptors, you can do that with this one as well. So animations, this is something else our applications usually require from time to time. And Angular provides two methods. There is the provide animations, which enables animations into your application, and then provide no-op animation, which does the opposite of that and disables animations into your application. So you might want to use, if you don't want animations and you want to reduce your bundle size, you use the no-op animation DI to sort of like disable that option. I know another question that you should get a lot when I'm working, when I'm talking about standalone components is, what about ng modules? Because if you're using something like a third-party module, what do I do with those DI that are required to make that active? Because you can sort of like import a module into your component, but how do you say like provide do dependency injection for a series of components? And this is where this function called import providers from comes in. It allows you to sort of like you pass in a list of ng modules, and Angular is going to take those and extract providers from that. So this is an example of how you use it. So you can provide ng module 1 and ng module 2. And this allows you to have a compatibility with with ng modules. So maybe you are in the process of migrating to standalone components, or maybe you are using a library which hasn't been updated. And let's be honest, at the moment, I don't even think there are that many libraries out there that have been updated standalone components, and so on. And this allows you to sort of like use standalone components without missing some of the key features we really love in Angular. So when standalone components were released, we used to do, we didn't have the provide HTTP client, provide router providers, let me call them providers. So we had to use this. So for instance, if we wanted to supply routes to application, we say import providers from, then you say router module dot for route and then pass in the route. But now that has been replaced with provide route, which is much simpler and makes more sense. So this is for compatibility purposes, and maybe if you find something that's not working with so if you are using some weird configuration on something that's not working with the provide style of APIs, then you can use this to make sure it's compatible with those APIs. But if you find yourself in such a situation, please file an issue and then let the team discuss, and then we can talk about this and make this a little bit much better, or can be improved for the future, so that we can have much better support for standalone components. So this example here is when you want to provide for the router component and it's all its children, and then you can do it per route here. So you can say for this path and all its children, import providers from these ng modules and so on. I guess the next question is always get asked is what's next? So first, I want to make this clear. Modules are not going anywhere. They have their purpose. There is a reason they have survived for this long, and they are going to be hanging around. It's an extra feature which you can use if you want, and if you don't, you don't have to use it. It doesn't bother you. And I know in some sense, or in some larger application, modules make sense. You can use a combination of them. You can say, hey, in this case, I'm going to use ng modules because the way I'm structuring my components makes sense, and sort of like makes sense to have sort of like everything contained within a single container. In some cases, you can say, this doesn't need to be a module. This can be a standalone component. And don't worry about putting them in the same application. It's okay. It's going to work. So it's compatible. So you can import an ng module into a component. You can import a component into a module, a standalone component into a module. That works very well. So don't be afraid to experiment and find something that works for you and your team. And that's the whole idea of Angular. That's the whole idea about standalone APIs. It's about providing us with the flexibility. It's about providing us with an extra option, not taking away anything from anyone. I hope I'm making myself clear. So I said I'm going to have some resources. So all these are links which you can click and go to specifically to those resources. So the first one is this is Angular Guides, which is part of the organization, or I'm part of, which is called This is Learning. And we keep an updated guide for Angular beginners, and we have like a section for standalone APIs, which we update regularly so that you can have like a single source where you can find all standalone APIs. Then there's this article by Andrew Scott, which is published, I think, this week on the blog for Angular, and it goes through the Angular router and the changes coming to it. Like I said, I focus mostly on standalone APIs on this talk, but there are a lot of things that are coming to Angular 15 that are very exciting. We are talking about functional guards. We are talking about functional HTTP interceptors. We are talking about Angular moving towards a functional state more than it is. We are talking about improvements into how tree shaking works, and this mostly enabled by the new APIs for standalone and making things possible. And then we have the official guide, which is Angular started with getting started with standalone components. This is from Angular, and you find how to convert existing applications to standalone, how to do things in details in a way that I didn't get into without building an application. So maybe that's for our future conversation if you want. And then there are issues like with the standalone APIs from Angular guys, you're going to learn how to test the standalone components and so on. These are conversation or these are topics which we can cover in future. We can have a discussion, a robust discussion about it. And also you need to understand we are at the very early stages of standalone components. So things are going to change, things are going to change for the better, things are going to improve for us in the future, and at some point in the future maybe we change something, maybe we introduce something else. I have no idea what. So it's an exciting future for Angular. So that's it for me. I think it was a very brief talk about 30 minutes if I'm not mistaken. I hope I didn't go very fast for anyone. And those are my links if you want to follow me on Twitter, GitHub. I want to see my latest blog post on mainawycliffe.dev. Feel free to follow me, ask me any question, contact me. I do a lot of mentoring by the way, so if you have a question, if you have any help you need, please free to get in touch and I will do my best to help you. And now I'm going to entertain questions because I think that's the last slide. So if you have any questions, I'm open to answering them to the best of my knowledge. Let me just add that point before I get asked something I'm unable to ask. So any questions?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Maina. So yeah, guys, feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. And wait for that. Just also another thing to mention is that personally, I've worked with standalone components, and I appreciate the fact that you just need to import only the modules that you need. For example, if you are working with forms, you get to only import those forms and all that. So you get to have that. You don't have that burden of like always having to think about the ng modules and all that. You just only import the modules that you need in that standalone component. And yeah, feel free definitely to check out the YouTube Angular's YouTube channel. They also have the content there to like what exactly standalone components all about and how the future is looking like moving forward. And yeah, we definitely hope that you also start building stuff with standalone components. Don't be afraid of trying it because that's how people get to understand some of these concepts. So yes, Maina also mentioned that he's also an Angular Kenya mentor, so please feel free to reach out to him. Have any questions? If you want to book a one-on-one session with him to like just get to know probably how he works and all that, and what's his experience with Angular and all that. So please feel free to do that. I want to open up the floor to any questions that anyone may have. So please feel free to unmute yourself. And I can also start with my question.
Yes.
Just a quick one. So, Maina, where do you see? Oh, so not even where do you see? Like, what some of the use cases have you come across when it comes to service inform?
One of the areas, and this is something that's going, I think, to be adding in Angular 15. I think we had what we used to call common modules in Angular, which basically enabled features like directives for ng, for pipes, and so on. And the more interesting thing is that with standalone components that might be rendered unnecessary, in that now you can import, if you want to use a single pipe, you can import it. You don't have to worry about everything else. And this is a place where I'm like, it's exciting. Like one of the exciting aspects is that you should have like, let's say you have like a formatting pipe within your application. and you want to use that across your application. Before, it had to be wrapped around a module, and one of the bad habits people had of doing was sort of like having the sort of like a utilities module that you could import everywhere. But with standalone components, that's no longer the case. So you can just create your pipe, your directive, and then just import it wherever you want to see. And this is one of the most powerful points of standalone components, giving you that easy, giving you less work, and making it easier for you not to make mistakes. Because I think we have all done this at some point where we have like a utility module, because you don't really want to go allowed importing 10 to 15 things here and there. So let's just have one module, and once I refer to that, I can have everything. I have everything exported with that module. So there's also like the other thing, I have seen some exciting work within the community around bootstrapping single component. I think Brendan Roberts is doing some amazing work with Vite and Angular, and most of this is possible because of standalone APIs allowed bootstrapping individual components. So we have like anyone who has used Astro, which is another static site generator / framework that allows for manual IRADs. So you can sort of like bring your own components. So you can have like a static site and then add in components from other frameworks, whether it's Angular, Vue, React, and so on. And with standalone components, now you can bootstrap a single component. And now you're starting, we have like some work from Brendan Roberts as well that for NG Astro, which allows you to use a combination of both Astro and Angular. And these are some of the exciting things I'm seeing with standalone components.
Hi, Maina. I have a question about, you said that the basic pipes and directives that come with common modules aren't going to be in standalone components by default. So I'm thinking about a scenario, maybe you have one parent component. You see the way you can separate routes. You have the one route and then you have the children for the routes. So maybe you need the ng4 in the children, importing the pipes and directives that you need in the parent, have them in the children also.
Not providers are not, imports are not. At least as far as I'm aware. So you have to, for every standalone component, there is that import array which you have to import things that you're consuming with that component. But as far as I'm aware, I want to add an asterisk to that, and they have changed a little bit, but I'm not sure.
Okay. So, thanks.
Any other questions? Oh, just another one, Maina. So as we can see that also we have, that probably like in terms of like architecting an application, you have things like shared modules and all that. Where do you see standalone components getting into this? Like, like just where do you see that happen? Like, do you see it working well with shared modules and that? What's your take on that?
I think this is a part that I think that as a community we are trying to figure out, because with shared module you had the advantage of importing like having a single unit of many components in there working together that is exported. But with standalone components we are talking about mostly individual exports, which means we are still figuring out how exactly to do this. I have seen some sort of like nice play with words from people whereby they have like a single export array and then import that and then spread that into a sort of like wherever you want to use it. I don't know if that makes sense. So you have like multiple components, then have like an index file the way you should use it in JavaScript, then import everything and then export the file as an array, and then that sort of like gives you the same flexibility as a shared module, but with standalone components. But I still think as a community and people who are using Angular, the more we get around to using that, the more we are going to start to figure out how exactly we can work with this, how exactly we can implement this, how exactly we can improve this. Because at the end of the day, the biggest problem with the shared module is that you may be importing either too much or too little. Unless you are sure like a series of content of the module are related, then you end up in a situation whereby you may mess with things like tree shaking. But with the import and export, I don't really think so, but I'm not sure. So I think it's sort of like a future which is we are looking into trying to figure out exactly where as a community we are and where we are heading into this, because it's something we haven't encountered before to this extent. And before there, of course, we had like scams which were popular, but it tended to be sort of like a niche being not adopted widely by the community. But this is something that's supported by the teams and might end up gaining a lot of traction. So we might end up having to confront some of these challenges.
Anyone else with a question? Or maybe just a question to ask. Has anyone here used standalone components, whether it's a personal project or work project? Just raise your hand using a reaction. Has anyone done that?
I have.
Okay.
That's, I think, the
Anyone
obvious
else?
one.
Okay. Seems like not everyone has actually tried it.
Yeah,
Yeah, please feel free to check it out. Yeah, sorry, Maina.
Yeah, I was just saying, like it's not like something you need to create a new project to use. If you find yourself in a situation whereby you need to create a module with components in it, and you find yourself in doing a single component, try standalone components for that and see how that works. You can use it within your project without any. It's backward compatible, so you don't have to worry too much about that. That's my advice. And see, if it works for you, then continue using it. If it doesn't work, you can always convert it back to a normal component by removing the standalone property or setting that to false. So, like the barrier to entry is so low, it's easy to experiment within your project and see how it works. And then maybe after seeing how it works, you might find yourself jumping into the bandwagon or using it a little bit more.
And I think one thing that really excites me, the functional guard that I saw, and man, it's just amazing, like seeing how this ecosystem is really growing and really improving when it comes to developer experience. And I really cannot wait. Cannot wait for also you guys to be able to see some of these new things that are coming in. Uh, be rest assured that we'll try as much as possible to share with you some of these um, new improvements that are coming to Angular. And yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah, thank you, Maina. If there's no other question, I'd like to say a big thank you, Maina, for taking the time to do this session with us. As a reminder, once again, Maina is an Angular GD, so don't come to only to me for about Angular stuff. There's also Maina, and there's also Angular Kenya mentor. He'll be able to also give you tips on how it works and all that. And I really hope that you get to also try some of this new stuff that are coming to Angular, because personally, I used to be scared of it because I was like, things are moving so fast that I can't really catch up with, But the more you get to try them, watch videos, read those articles, you get to even really understand how you can slowly migrate from, let's say, legacy code to the most up-to-date or the most improved versions of Angular. So don't be afraid to try them out. Also, don't be also afraid to communicate with us, engage with us as mentors, as GDEs, as your fellow developers, because we are all here to help each other and like learn from each other. So feel free to engage with us. So I don't know, Maina, do you have any parting shots? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, that has been the phrase for 2022. Hopefully not 2023. So, yeah, I was just saying, don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid of new things. Some of these things are here to help us. Some of these things are here to improve our own user experience. And we are headed towards some interesting times in the future because I believe there's a front-end development is at a crossroad where we need to improve on some other aspects. We need to drop some other things, and we are going to be seeing a lot of interesting features coming in the future. And we need to embrace that future because it's not only for the benefit for us as developers, but also the benefits for our users, which also is the benefit for the business which we all work for. So that's my part in short. So just embrace the future. Don't be afraid of these new things. And they're not difficult. Once you look at the service, you're going to start, oh, that makes sense now. And for the most part, don't worry too much about how things work under the hood. Because on the surface of it, standalone components are very simple. But once you start going under the hood, it starts giving you a headache. You don't have to worry about that. There is a lot of people who are worrying about that and making sure you don't have to do that. And that's it from me.
Yep. Yep. Right. I'd like to bring this session to a close.